Hello, my name is Jonah Dempsey. Right now it's December 2012, and a lot of people are talking about consciousness transformation. The end of the Mayan long count calendar and beginning of the next count seems to be kind of a metaphor for a rite of passage that human consciousness is going through. I'd like to talk about some of the problems with this, and then talk about maybe how we can redeem the idea of consciousness transformation. So first of all, I find a lot of problems with, I can address the problem of a sort of normative mode of transformation or individuation. And what's interesting about this is that I personally find the individuation process from Carl Jung, he came up with this idea where basically we all individuate, which is become different, become individual. We start kind of the same. Everyone has the same human, it's almost like becoming post-human or overcoming narcissism, overcoming the whole narcissistic wound, stuff like that. But the individuation process can be seen as very normative. And I think it's actually the opposite. I think what's normative is the non-individuated mass consciousness, like everybody conforming and so on. Individuation is very non-conformist. So consciousness transformation, first of all, the main problem in thinking of it is if we think of it even as maturity, becoming mature, there's a lot of problems in postmodern thought where people will say, about who's to say what is mature? Who's to say, who defines these normative processes? There's some kind of hegemonic power structure that's covered up with normativity. People like Jacques Derrida, the deconstruction movement, that's really, and also a lot of post-structuralism, postmodernism, different schools of thought. I mean, these are kind of umbrella terms, but still, there's, or Judith Butler and her work in gender performativity. These kind of critiques would say, or someone like Levi Bryant, who's a proponent of object-oriented ontology, he would say, can we imagine individuation without the sovereign, without the master, without what Zizek would call the sublime object, without these God words, God terms, because those are what make it normative. If you think of individuation as becoming perfect, but I think this is the first problem, is the normativity of consciousness transformation. But then it can be revealed that that's not actually a problem, because consciousness transformation can be revealed as the thing that overcomes or overturns that normativity itself. So as long as we don't fall into the trap of imagining consciousness transformation normatively, in which case we perpetuate the very myth we decry, I think, so to kind of recap, the first problem of consciousness transformation that I'd like to talk about a little bit is normativity. What is a normative, what is maturity? What is individuation? What is growing up? All these different kinds of things. These are all consciousness transformation, but they're also normative in some ways. So, and then I'll talk about, I think, how we can redeem it. And by redeeming, I mean we can use the idea of consciousness transformation, but we can redeem it from being this superficial sort of thing. So, all right, so for the first one about normativity, it's really difficult when thinking of consciousness transformation to not have some sort of ego inflation. And I think of ego inflation as very much what perpetuates the whole normative framework that combats individuation, combats differentiation and novelty. Because novelty, in the sense of something that is actually new, that's structurally new, not just new at the level of phenomenological content, but structurally, a new structure emerging. Maybe a qualitative difference instead of a quantitative difference. That is basically, that's what individuation facilitates, is this these novel, the creation of a new personality, the novel, or a new expression, the novel expression. So basically, so normativity being all of the standards of normalcy, that can be seen very strong in the work of ego psychology. A lot of ego psychologists, Donald Winnicott, in self-psychology, a lot of pop psychology, Western, British, and then U.S. psychologists basically have a lot of, and even Kleinians have a lot of kind of healthy ego. The healthy ego should be modeled after, the patient comes to therapy with an unhealthy ego and models their ego on the ideal healthy ego of the analyst or therapist or counselor. And basically that whole normative, that's one of the main critiques. And even, I guess it could be said that Freud has fallen into this, but I don't think so. And Lacan definitely didn't, because Lacan was extremely critical of ego psychology, and Jung didn't, even though Jung and Lacan, I'm sure, never really had any point of contact in their theories. I do think, except maybe Freud as a common ancestor, but I do think that Jung was very opposed to the ego psychology. He was more in favor of self-psychology, and someone like Lacan would probably critique Jung for perpetuating narcissistic illusions or fantasies of the self, but I think it's actually the opposite. I think Jung was all about deflation. So, but I'll get into that in a minute. So back to the idea of normativity. So the main thing about normativity is that it's hiding this power structure, this privileged, hegemonic sort of, right way of doing things. And so really it's judging external things as good or bad, and it's breaking the golden rule of Stoicism, which is that external things are indifferent, neither good nor bad. And the only thing that one should ethically apply the test of good or bad to is one's own beliefs. So in a way, to properly endorse Stoicism, which I do, and I think to live through that endorsement, is to stick to that kind of golden rule of not judging external things as good or bad. And so normativity is almost this vicious attempt at virtue. It's like a vicious slave morality rather than master ethics, to use Nietzsche's term. So if normativity is judging external things as good or bad, for example, let's talk about the Stoic problem of perfection. The most perfect thing you can do is be virtuous. But if you try not to make mistakes, that's actually being vicious. You can try, of course we try not to make mistakes, but if you judge mistakes as bad or good for some weird reason, if you judge external things as good or bad, that's an unethical, vicious judgment. Because if you start judging mistakes as bad, then if somebody makes mistakes, you'll think they're a bad person, or you'll blame them or shame them. Basically, vice spreads itself through these sort of judgments of external things as good or bad. So the point here is that with perfection, there's a strange little twist where to attempt to be virtuous is perfect. You can't be more perfect than that. Meaning, perfection doesn't mean you don't make any mistakes. Perfection means you try to be virtuous, or you are virtuous, I guess. We work towards moral perfection of our virtue. But this working towards perfection of the virtue, as C.S. Lewis put it, is acquiring a taste for virtue. If a vicious person does virtuous things but doesn't have a taste for them, finds them distasteful, it's still vicious. So it's really developing and cultivating our own taste for virtue, which means cultivating within ourselves a lack of judgment of external things as good or bad, which means if we judge mistakes as bad, we're being vicious. So you get this weird twist where it's perfect, not when you don't make mistakes, but it's perfect when you are virtuous, when you judge your own beliefs as good or bad, and you abstain from judging external things as good or bad. And then it's vicious when you attempt to imitate perfection. That is, when you attempt to not make any mistakes, when you chastise yourself or others for making mistakes. It's very vicious. So it gets to this idea of normativity, because normativity gets into perfection and ideals and so on. And it's really a question of, basically, fall into the trap of normativity, it falls into these idealized things, these ideals, these images, idols, which, as Adam Phillips put it, we need ideas, not ideals. Because ideals you can only really wrestle with, or you can either, it's kind of binary. It's fight or flight, or it's struggle with them. And then if you get rid of one ideal, you find another one and you latch onto that. And it's a very helpless, needy, childish kind of thing. So, but see, again, it's difficult for me to even use terms like childish or mature, adult without normativity, but I would say that just it's up to the listener to know that I don't mean this normative adulthood. We have to be able to imagine becoming adult as a process of individuation, which eschews normativity. And in fact, all of the critiques of, who are you to say if it's mature or childish, that itself is already normative in some sense, and that is judging external things as good or bad. So basically, I'd like to make the following point in this first problem of consciousness transformation. When you imagine a normative consciousness transformation, it's very problematic. And normativity itself is this sort of non-stoic, unethical, vicious judgment of external things as good or bad. Because if it's normative, it almost implies it's saying this is the right way, this is the good way, this is the perfect way, and the imperfections, the mistakes are bad. We need to judge those as bad things. And so it's totally breaking the golden rule of Stoicism. And see, I feel, I guess this is my little point here, is that I think Stoicism is very much an important part of consciousness transformation and a very important part of individuation. And so Stoicism, it doesn't have to have that particular form. I mean, there's a lot of different Stoic beliefs. I'm just using the term Stoicism because that's one of the best examples, one of the best concrete examples of this archetypal perspective or viewpoint. But basically, I guess my point is, consciousness transformation is Jungian individuation, and the way to do it is through Stoicism. And if we lack Stoicism, then we end up in this sort of normative idea where we can imagine that we're having consciousness transformation, but that itself is the vicious, normative, privileged kind of way of doing it. It's not differentiating as much as it's conforming and copying and imitating. And again, the imitation of perfection is vicious. It's perfect to be virtuous, but to try to be perfect is vicious. So it's one of those weird things where if you're not trying to be perfect, if you're just trying to be virtuous, that already is perfect. But if you're trying to be perfect, that's vicious. And it's the same thing where if you just individuate, differentiate, that's doing it. That's stoic, that's ethical, that's virtuous. But then if you're trying to mature in a certain way because you have an ideal of, I mean, of course we need, here's another Adam Phillips quip, is we need fictions, but we need healthy fictions. We need enticements to being an adult. And so I do think that we do need to have some ideals, what it is to be a good Samaritan, a good citizen. Of course, everybody needs to have these ideals. But the problem is when we fall into normative sort of, beliefs, especially about, the worst thing I can't stand is for someone to act really childish, and then if you say you're acting childish, they would say, well, you're just being normative. You have this normative idea of what it is to be an adult, and, I have a different idea of what it is to be an adult, so you're just being normative. And so the whole thing is, the one being normative is the one that's judging external things as good or bad, because that is normativity. Normativity is the judgment of external things as good or bad. So we can cut through a lot of that by saying the one that's truly being normative is the one that's not being stoic. You can't be stoic and normative at the same time, which is, criticism of Stoicism might be that it is normative, but again, those people aren't stoic. They're being normative by seeing it. They're seeing their own belief projected into another supposed to know. Like, that's just a good side point. Zizek pointed out that, when people talk about Orthodox Freudians who see phallic symbols everywhere, these Orthodox Freudians don't exist except as the subject supposed to believe of the person who purports there to be Orthodox Freudians who see phallic symbols everywhere. In other words, the only one who really believes there are phallic symbols everywhere is the person who says this belief is something which must be combated, something that must be fought. So there are some beliefs that are purely virtual. I think this is one of Zizek's points in Reality of the Virtual. There are some completely virtual beliefs that the only person who believes it is the one who says somebody else believes it, but nobody else actually does. There's no Orthodox Freudian who really sees phallic symbols everywhere. But when people say, oh, I can't stand that, Orthodox Freud of seeing phallic symbols everywhere, they're the only ones. The people decrying it are the only ones who believe it, but they disavow their belief, and it's only believed through a surrogate subject supposed to believe, following Lacan's subject supposed to know. So that's just a side point. But getting back to the discussion of normativity, when someone critiques the individuation process as normative or Stoicism as normative, they themselves are being normative, but through a surrogate subject supposed to be normative. You know what I mean? It's individuation is the furthest thing from normative because it's all about something new, novelty. It's not normative at all. It's not just repetition. It's not conformity. It's not cookie cutter, But the most normative thing of all is the sort of, here's the real irony, is that there's all these people who are basically stunted at the sort of teenage narcissistic phase. They've never really grown out of being teenagers. And so they have this attitude of nobody really understands me. And I'm so different, and I'm so unique, and I'm so individual, and you can't put me in a box, man, and I'm so, And then if you talk to these people and you say something like, grow up, they'll say, well, you're just being normative, how can you have this normative idea of what it is to be an adult, and so on. But the most normative thing of all is this narcissistic idea. The narcissism itself is like what breeds normativity in the bad way. It's what breeds this idea, but it's always through the surrogate, scapegoated other supposed to be normative. So, my point is, it's a point that von Franz made in her book Pure Aeternus. Marie-Louise von Franz, the star disciple of Carl Jung, she said that she's seen hundreds of young men who are all virtually identical because they've all associated with the god of youth, this sort of Peter Pan, eternal youth, pure Aeternus archetype. And these men are all identical, but what's so identical about them is that they all feel so unique. They feel so special, so different, so unusual. And so that is the unindividuated. It's a strange paradox where the unindividuated, the non-Stoic, is the one who feels so special and misunderstood and thinks that everybody else is the evil normative people, the ones who have these normative ideas and that cover up their power structures and so on. But they're the only ones who are truly being normative. It's just through their surrogate subject supposed to be normative. So you find all these people who have this wealth of subjectivity, and they haven't experienced any subjective destitution. They've never lost their good intentions. They've never lost their childlike faith and so on, faith in their own sincerity. They're so sincere and well-meaning, and they believe in their own good intentions so much. And, that's the most unindividuated, undifferentiated, common thing of all. It's to feel completely different and individuated. Even alienation, to say I've always felt different, I've always been outcast, and I never fit in well with the group. That's the most common feeling of all. So to really become individuated is to, go past that, to develop beyond. And again, the critique would say, well, from someone who has that childish sort of an idea would be, well, how can you say I need to develop or grow or change? Because that's just being normative. How can you say, but the whole thing is, individuation is not saying you have to grow or change into some certain specific thing. It's just saying grow and change. Because if you're stuck at this sort of narcissistic phase, see, that's what's so funny, is it's like the narcissistic phase of being a teenager, basically, although people can be any age, because again, there's no set age of development. People grow at different, it's like how, Lacan put it, there's various times, and each time is marked by its own qualities, but it's not necessarily a certain age, So there's a time of basically tremendous narcissism and feeling special and believing in your good intentions and feeling like you're so different and feeling like the world revolves around you and all these different things. And that is what breeds normativity through perceiving it in others. Because that's what says, don't tell me to grow up, don't tell me to be an adult, because your idea of maturity is this normative idea of maturity. But the thing is, the people saying grow up are they're not saying you have to be this, you have to be that. They're just saying stop being a narcissistic kid. Because the narcissistic kid is actually the one that's the most common. It's like this funny paradox where the narcissistic kid is saying, don't tell me to grow up because I can be anything I want to be. but they're not being anything they want to be. They're being something identical to everybody else. And the people saying grow up are actually saying be something that you want to be something different, be individual, become unique. Because right now you're not unique at all. You're an identical cookie cutter of everybody else. And so that's the harsh reality of it, is that the people who are so against normativity are the mass conformists that put forth normativity itself, that continue to propagate it. It's one of those weird ironies where, it's like anti-authoritarianism can be a motive of authoritarianism, or anti-fascism can be the a motive appearance of fascism. Anti-capitalism can be a motive of capitalism. You can buy a shirt with anti-capitalist slogans. So that's, I think, one of the lessons from Hegel, is that things can appear as their opposite. Anti-normativity can be normativity. Even the people who hate narcissism and decry it in others can be, so it gets into a problem here, because again, if I'm endorsing Stoicism and then I say, oh, don't be like those non-Stoics, then I'm not being Stoic at all, because I'm scapegoating and I'm judging these other people as bad and so on. And so it's a weird asymmetrical relation where you can say it's good to be Stoic, but it's not bad to be non-Stoic, because if I say it's bad to be non-Stoic, I'm already breaking the rule of Stoic virtue, which is don't judge things as good or bad. But, when I'm saying it's good to be Stoic, I think also I'm not saying it's good to be a Stoic as an object, as an external thing. I'm saying it's good to internally have Stoic beliefs. It's virtuous to have Stoic beliefs, which are the beliefs that we should only apply the test of good and bad to our own beliefs. That's the Stoic point, is when we apply the test of good or bad, axiologically, meaning either good or bad ethical judgment, or even good or bad taste, and style and all these other things, we should apply them to ourselves, to our own internal judgments. Why do we think something's good or bad, as opposed to just what's good and bad? Which is, what Carl Jung said is a major turning point when people grow out of childish narcissistic illusions. Oftentimes they do it as a teenager or as an adult. Some people never do. But, the major turning point in the individuation process is when the human subject stops asking what he or she likes and begins asking why he or she likes it. Because somebody who only asks what he or she likes is completely asleep at the wheel, unconscious, reflexive, reactive, not Stoic at all. I mean, that's vicious to just go through life. It's almost, Stoicism is saying we have an ethical duty to individuate, which is to become conscious of our unconscious. And that is the consciousness transformation that allows actual novelty at the level of structures to emerge, is this process of becoming aware of things we weren't aware of, or things that we weren't aware that we knew. Becoming aware that we actually knew certain things, whether or not those things were true, that we didn't know we know. So it's, like the motto that Freud and actually Lacan both had on their wall, wo es ver, ist werden ein ich, or something, I forget. Where it was, there I shall be. And it is the unconscious. So where it was, it was a pure it was an object, something outside of me. There I, the ego, ich, there I shall be. And, it's coming to know our unconscious desire. I mean, that's consciousness transformation. So, okay, so the first problem of consciousness transformation is normativity. But then I think one of the redemptions to this is the idea that consciousness transformation itself, or not redeeming normativity here, but redeeming the idea of consciousness transformation, why it could be important, is that if we properly understand it, it can actually be this sort of Stoic turn, or this individuation. But here's the thing, I'm with Yuji Krishnamurti. Yuji Krishnamurti is known as the other Krishnamurti, not Jiddu Krishnamurti, who's the popular one. Yuji Krishnamurti is very unpopular because he has a very unpopular message. I'll paraphrase here, but basically he says, anybody looking for enlightenment, looking for consciousness transformation, looking for spirituality, looking to be a better person, to be ethical, this or that, whatever you're looking for pleasure without pain, for happiness without sadness. Whether you're a spiritual ascetic or a drug addict, it's no different. You're looking for your fix. So he called it a spiritual fix. And this is a very unpopular sort of opinion. But that's kind of the opinion of Slavoj Žižek, like in Reality of the Virtual, or sorry, in Pervert's Guide to Cinema, where Žižek says he doesn't want any fast food enlightenment experience. You know, he doesn't want to see the reality behind the illusion, but he wants to see how the illusions have a reality of their own. The reality of the virtual again. So basically, the idea from U.G. Krishnamurti here is that when people ask for consciousness transformation, they don't really want it. They say they want it, but what they imagine it as being is something really good. And it's kind of like they don't even know what they're asking. It's almost like somebody goes to therapy, or to a Lacanian, I should say, because there's all different kinds of therapies. And even for Lacan, his work isn't even really therapy. His work is psychoanalysis. So it's not even meant to cure. So you can say somebody goes to a hardline Lacanian, and they have this preconception when they're going in that they're going to cure their symptom or whatever it is. What they don't realize is that Lacanian psychoanalysis is not about making them happy. It's about subjective destitution. It's about losing the ability to complain, losing the ability to ever think you're actually really sorry or remorseful for things. Even though you might feel remorseful, you always kind of doubt your own sincerity. It's a real subjective impoverishment or destitution, a loss of good intentions, which is not to say that you start having bad intentions for people, but that you stop believing that your sincerity or that your good intentions are actually there for anything other than to help you sleep at night. So, it's like a person goes into this sort of analysis thinking, okay, I'm going to get rid of my symptoms and be a happier, better person, and be more productive and more efficient. And no, not at all. It's all about subjective destitution, impoverishment. It's losing your ability, your wealth of subjectivity, losing your ability to say, oh, I'm so deep and I'm so complex and I'm so sincere. And if you go in there as this naive person kind of saying, I see myself as a doctor and I just want to protect the good innocent people from all the cause of all the problems in the world is those greedy bad people. This is what Timothy Morton calls beautiful soul syndrome. So you almost go into this sort of Lacanian analysis thinking, well, I'm this beautiful soul, or I see all these beautiful souls out there that I want to protect and save, and I'm a doctor, and I'm not a great person, I'm just a humble person, but I do my best and I try hard and all this stuff. And, the secret idea there is I'm going to become even more productive and better and learn how to have more happiness and less sadness. No, it's the opposite. I mean, if you weren't miserable before you went in, you will be miserable after, but it's good because as Jung put it, as Jung said, neurosis is caused by the avoidance of suffering. And so a certain amount of suffering is necessary, we go in, it's almost like we go to therapy saying, we're suffering, help me stop suffering. And then if it's an ego therapist, they'll be like, okay, sure. And they'll find a way to you model your unhealthy ego after their healthy one. And you have this new repressive, normative, vicious, program put in or whatever. But then if you go to a Lacanian or even a, Jungian in a different way, it's like, okay, sure. You'll work through this, but you'll actually get in touch with the real suffering. It's almost like you think you're suffering from the symptom, but that's not real suffering. You will really suffer. As Lacan put it, he can't treat rich people because rich people only know how to buy. They don't know how to pay. And you have to pay to go through psychoanalysis. So if we think of consciousness transformation as really something like psychoanalysis, individuation, I mean, again, not a normative way of thinking about it, but just saying that there's an affinity between all these. Even the shamanic tradition or the tradition of hermitage or various rites of passage and transformation, spirits, quests people have gone through at various peoples throughout history, or even esoteric, secret societies. There's so many different things which are all really kind of working at the same thing, which is consciousness transformation. And they're just different strategies for getting there. Hypnosis is a strategy that uses suggestion. Psychoanalysis is a strategy that eschews suggestion because it believes that suggestion is trying to overcome resistance and that resistance is vital for the truth. I think basically psychoanalysis cares more about truth than about happiness. The goal of psychoanalysis is not to be happy, it's to find out the truth. And the truth can only really be created through this revelation of your own subjective history, which involves the destitution. It involves a tremendous narcissistic ego wound and a working through and grieving the loss of the narcissistic inflated grandiosity and fantasies of omnipotence and omniscience and all the fantasies of good intentions. Really, it's, this is what I think, is that when people say they want consciousness transformation, they don't know what they're asking for. They think they're asking for some, they want the chakras to be open or something. I think it was in a Robert E. Svoboda book where he was quoting the Agori Vimalananda. It was in the Agora trilogy. And what Vimalananda said is all these Westerners, they want their chakras to be open, but their chakras are too open. They need to close their chakras. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I think it's funny that even, it's the whole idea that we don't know what we're asking for. We want something more, but it's like maybe the chakras need to be closed a little bit. I don't know anything about chakras. I'm just saying that from a psychoanalytic perspective, it's almost like somebody goes into psychoanalysis and they say, oh, I really want to avoid all this suffering. I'm just suffering so much from my symptom, and I just want to find a way out of this suffering. It's really frustrating, and I just want to get rid of all my frustration. And almost like there's almost a trick there where it's like a bait and switch. Like, okay, sure, I can help you, but the helping is learning how to bear frustration and learning how to really suffer. Or it's like, oh, I've been so full of grief, but then you find out the person hasn't been grieving. They've been really melancholic, and melancholia is a fixation that prevents the grieving process. Or you tell somebody that they need to have faith, and they say, oh, I have plenty of faith, but then you find out they have a bunch of beliefs, but their beliefs are really negative, and there's nothing to do with faith. Faith is like having faith that things are going to work out, and having faith that, those are a few different random ideas, but basically there's almost this paradox where people go in because they are suffering, or this irony, but then it's actually that they're really avoiding suffering, and that the psychoanalysis will really make them suffer. And so I think this consciousness transformation, what I'm talking about here is that it's always painful. You always have to pay. You can't just buy it. You have to really pay for it. And you have to pay in a deeply personal way. It's a grieving process. And you can't be melancholic or depressed about it either, because those are kind of fixations which prevent grief. So I think the redemption of consciousness transformation is saying that consciousness transformation is still a very valid concept in all of its different forms, whether it's through psychoanalysis, whether it's through shamanic, esoteric traditions, or whether it's through even art, creativity. I mean, really, consciousness transformation is the revelation or even production of new truths, truth events, we could say. So following Elaine Badiou, there's 4 truth procedures. There's art, science, politics, and philosophy, is that it? And basically these truth procedures, they have to do with the formation of novelty. They're truth events which, the transformation of consciousness entails epiphanies, which the thing that's so difficult about them is all the problems of the event, where it reinscribes the past and everything changes, but then it becomes sedimentary and it becomes crystallized and rigid, and it becomes the past itself and needs to be usurped again. And so there's this eternally, the old dying away. I mean, it's very pagan almost, but it's very cyclical in the sense of cyclical time. But see, it's a difficult problem here because it's just like when you have a breakthrough in psychoanalysis, or maybe a psychedelic trip, or who knows what, and you have some sort of epiphany. Oftentimes the epiphany will be it'll be inflated. It'll be, well, first of all, there's false epiphanies. Those are just ego inflations, which seem like epiphanies, but they're totally fake. They're just delusions. And then there are infantile narcissistic fantasies and so on. But then there are real epiphanies. The real epiphany is like, wow, I'm really a narcissist, or, you have some, but see, it instantly becomes a new label, and it's so problematic. And this is why, Lacan talked about the problem of when a subject first has an epiphany or a breakthrough and comes to know a new label or a new word, it's like, it's good, but then as soon as they have that label, they can use that label. I think the term he used was as a weapon or a shelter. So it's like, well, I'm just a narcissist, or, well, I just had a bad family, or, so any label, I mean, this even gets to the problem of normativity, because normativity has to do with labeling, of course, with categorizing things. And so, but labels are important and they're useful, the problem is that as soon as we have an epiphany, we can kind of put a box on it and label it, and then it becomes part of our subjective narrative. We can become like a self-deprecating narcissist. So, for example, if my epiphany is that I have, or that I'm a narcissist, then I can start using that to exhibit mastery. It's like I can appropriate that, humility as a mode of pride, the appearance of humility, but it's actually, I'm proud of my humility. And that's, again, like virtue. Virtue can be true virtue, or it can appear to be virtue, but actually be vice. Virtue can be a mode of appearance of vice, of viciousness. And so it's really difficult because I can try to appear stoic, but I can be proud of my stoicism, and I can preach my stoicism to people in a very non-stoic way, and then I'm not stoic at all, I'm being vicious. Or I can be aware of my own narcissism. I mean, this is even like Zizek's point about the liberal arts professor who is totally aware of his own guilt, and he is constantly decrying his own guilt, his white male privilege, and so on. And even things like his tenure and the fact that he's highly paid for just being an intellectual, perhaps. I mean, I'm kind of embellishing the point here, but there's a tremendous amount of guilt for someone of high status and so on, and they can actually endorse that guilt as a way to try to escape it, to escape culpability, to say like, oh, I'm such a bad, part of this bad power structure. I fully embrace my guilt. I fully endorse my guilt. But that's already their attempts to find a safe place outside of guilt, to show their mastery over it. So it's the same problem with narcissism, say, or anything. I mean, if somebody learns, oh, you mean it was all one of my parents, or, if people have breakthroughs. And it's the same thing with the individuation process, and what Carl Jung called this is inflation. And what he said is basically people can have ego inflation experiences, and that you're especially at risk for ego inflation or possession experiences, possession by the complexes, when undergoing individuation, because individuation does have these kind of dark nights of the soul, and these very, it's a battle, it's a spiritual battleground, it's a war going on, a split between different parts of consciousness. It's not at all a harmonious reciprocal self. It's a very antagonistic self, divided against itself. I think even though Lacan would critique Jung, or Lacanians would probably critique depth psychologists and so on for their normative ideas of self and their ideas of holism and unity of self and so on, Jung's unity was the same as Lacan's unity. It was a lack of unity. The one universal was split, antagonism. So for Jung, everybody was at war going on inside. He even said, there was a quote where he said, you would be amazed that people seem so calm on the exterior, but they have a war being waged inside of them. And so that's very much like Lacan's split self. It's not just a split between conscious, unconscious, or between ego and id. The whole thing is split. Even in the unconscious, there's so many different, we have a cast of characters. As James Hillman put it, even people who aren't multiple personality disorder, he was talking about here. And as he put it, we have a whole cast of characters that, I think his example was, it's like a building, like a boarding house, or almost like a hotel or something, where there's all these characters coming and going, and some of them are minor characters and just make minor appearances, and others are major characters. But we like to think of ourselves egotistically as unified, because we have this identity, this image this idealized image, persona, mask that we've identified with, and so on. But really, we have all these different conflicting desires, conflicting, ambivalence, ambiguity, different personalities, fighting, vying for power. There's a lot of antagonism and conflict, and so basically, I think part of the individuation process is about undergoing some of these antagonists. As Jung put it, it's being crucified, and you're crucified between your different desires, and they're really battling out for supremacy. And there is this sort of antagonistic battle going on. And so when that happens, it's very easy to get inflated. It's very easy to think, oh, that's it, I got it. I think this is the reason that in Lacanian psychoanalysis, oftentimes the session would be punctuated. It would be shortened. I mean, it could be extended too, but typically shortened by, the punctuation would be right at a crucial moment where it's when the client realizes something, but before they're able to verbalize and demonstrate their realization as good intentions. So it's almost like, if I figure out that I want to do something, it's that moment of punctuation before I tell anybody about it. Because as soon as I tell people about it, I'm already converting it to secondary narcissistic gain, all this. I'm pimping it out at that point. So, say I decide I want to start jogging, and I have this realization, and before I can express it, the psychoanalysis should be punctuated, because then I'll internalize it, and I'll have to sit with it, and I'll have to deal with it, as opposed to if I can just tell somebody about it, then I've already gained something from just demonstrating my good intentions. So, it's almost short-circuiting that misrecognition process, which is the process by which every new realization is appropriated and becomes this old, rigid, dogmatic structure. So really, psychoanalysis only offers interpretations, even, or should, as punctuations. The interpretation is not this normative label. That would be psychiatry, I guess. But it's not just, you are this. And interpretation is always meant to be provisional insofar as it's only really meant to disrupt. It's meant to confuse. The interpretation shouldn't even be understandable. As Lacan put it, if you understand an interpretation, then it's not psychoanalysis. It's not a psychoanalytic interpretation. Because the interpretation is meant to disrupt the constant sense-making or constant understanding, recognition of everything. Oh yeah, I know. Oh, I see, I get it. Oh, it's just that. That's what basically, people are egotistically, narcissistically always recognizing everything. And in that recognition, they're appropriating it to use it for their narcissistic defense mechanism. So their new label then becomes a new weapon or a new shelter. It protects them. So it's almost like, if you want somebody to realize they're a narcissist, you have to work on the narcissism, because if they stay a narcissist and just realize it, then they'll use the fact they're a narcissist to extract narcissistic supply. I mean, it's one of those weird things where it's almost like, if you want to, change the capitalist, say you have a capitalist business, you have to actually get them to endorse something besides capitalism. Because if otherwise, if you just give them a bunch of anti-capitalist stuff, they'll just start selling it. And, the capitalist will be selling the anti-capitalist propaganda or whatever. And so it's the same for the narcissist. If the narcissist doesn't actually change qualitatively, or even a vicious person. A vicious person will start using virtuous traits in a way that's vicious. It'll be a vicious imitation of virtue. Like, if you don't work on cultivating virtue with that person, if you just say, here's what it is to be good, then they'll try to imitate what it is to be good and perfect, and they'll, it's even more vicious, because it's vicious to try to be perfect, because it's judging mistakes as good or bad, but mistakes are just indifferent. So, all these points are just saying kind of the same thing in different ways, which is that real transformation of consciousness, as opposed to just superficial transformation. Moving the underground, actual transformation, novelty. It always involves this sort of subjective destitution. It's very painful. People say they want it, but they don't really want it. It's always basically, the real consciousness transformation sucks, putting it mildly. And so we all should do it, if not for ourselves, then for other people, because we'll make their lives a lot better when we do it, because it's giving up all of our childish, petty bullshit. It's giving up all of our narcissistic fantasies and infantile, it's not going beyond neurosis. I'm not saying that there's a way to not be neurotic or perverted or psychotic or, whatever people are, as the case may be. I'm not saying it's even a cure. I'm saying that it's, if we come to accept, and this sort of, I guess to individuate means it's good for us, but it feels like the worst thing. It's bad for the ego. It's the overturning of the ego. So if you think of yourself as your ego, it's almost like it's good for the body or it's good for the soul, but it's poison. It's the bitter pill for the ego. It's the worst narcissistic wounding imaginable. So there's all these narcissists who think, oh, cosmic consciousness transformation. Oh yeah, we're all undergoing chakra, enlightenment, awakening, blah, blah, blah. That's all this narcissistic ascent metaphor, which is all this flying high, these fantasies of good intentions, pure aeternus, puella aeterna. It's basically, from a Jungian perspective, it's all these people who are worshipping the youth gods and goddesses who don't know how to age, and they're not going to do very well when they age, because they love youth and they love exuberance. And of course, I don't want to be completely one-sided here, because as James Hillman's pointed out, there's a lot of tremendous things from the pure aeternus. The pure aeternus gives us child geniuses, prodigies like Mozart, You know, the pure eternus archetype is a very crucial, it's a near and dear archetype, but it's also the little prince. It's also it's the Peter Pan. It's the boy who can never grow up to be a man. And the corollary, the puella aeterna, the girl who can never grow up to be a woman. And basically these myths, while they do have great qualities, you know, these types of people tend to make everybody's life miserable around them. So it's almost like they really, you know, they get a lot more enjoyment. They're probably a lot happier than they'll ever be before psychoanalysis or before individuation. Individuation does not increase happiness. Individuation might help you cope. It might make you tougher. I don't know if tougher people are necessarily happier, you know. I think people might actually be happier when they're more sensitive, you know, highly sensitive people and so on. Not to say every highly sensitive person is a pure eternus or puella aeterna, but sensitivity is associated with childhood. And again, this gets to issues of normativity. Who's to say that it's normative to be a tough adult? Maybe we shouldn't be cynical adults, all this stuff. But I think we can't avoid, well, okay, first of all, normativity, sure, that's bad. You can be any kind of adult you want. We don't need to be a tough adult. We can, you know, imagine anything. We can come up with any idea of what it is to be an adult as long as it's based on reality, and it's you know, the thing about ideas, as Adam Phillips put it, they're non-diminishing. So it's good to have as many ideas. You know, come up with ideas. That's great. It's ideals that are really dangerous. When you have an ideal, you know, so even if I said that it's an ideal to be a tough adult, that's bad, because then I start judging anyone who's not tough as weak or, you know, bad people and so on. So again, it's a really difficult problem, but nevertheless, there is something like a toughening up that going through individuation, it won't make you happy, but it will make you tough. It won't give you what you want, but it'll make you stop wanting childish, infantile stuff. Or it'll make you want more than those things. You might still want those things, but more than the childish, infantile stuff, you'll want something else. You'll want reality. You'll want truth. You'll want, you know, but I mean, I think all these God terms, whether it's truth or freedom or any, whatever sublime object it may be, part of it is that the individuation process is the acceptance that those objects, those transcendent objects, are unattainable. So you stop looking for the perfect partner and the perfect this, the perfect that. You know, it's definitely, I mean, it's almost the sad thing or the boring thing, the deflationary thing is, at the end of the day, it's all that folk wisdom, all that common sense, all the stupid aphorisms and Hallmark cards, all the stuff you've known since you were a little kid. Those are the realities, you know, road to hell, paved with good intentions, all that kind of stuff. And it really is the boring, deflationary stuff, which is not to say that there are not any new ideas or new concepts or there's no new novelty. I actually think that what novelty is, it can only happen when people really understand these great truths, because the only thing that really carries weight concretely is something that has an archetypal foundation or archetypal underpinning. So all these archetypal great truths, the great myths and legends, you know, all these archetypal great truths are forever interpreted anew by artists of each generation. And the great works of art are those that are completely ahistorical in the sense that while they may express archetypes which are historically, contextually developed, sure, they work better, the great works of art work better when they're decontextualized, when they're taken out of context and interpreted in a completely new ahistorical context. And so I think that there is something about novelty where there's new ways of looking at these same truths or new ways of expressing these great truths which make them relevant. It's like, if you just see it on a Hallmark card and it doesn't mean anything to you, then you kind of know it and you say, oh yeah, I know, everyone knows that. But it's a different kind of knowing. It's kind of, you know, that's recognition, but recognition is not the same as savoir, is the French term that, you know, Lacan uses. And he says that savoir is the kind of knowledge that psychoanalysis aims at. It's not at getting people to recognize things as much as it's getting them to to have this revelation of things they didn't know that they knew. So my point here was just that basically when somebody says something like, who are we to say who's crazy and who's sane? Isn't just, you know, who's to say that modern society isn't crazy and we have it all backwards, and that the crazy people are really the sane ones? You know, again, it's that narcissistic, infantile, off-the-cuff dismissal of normativity, but the person who is attacking normativity ultimately is the only one who really believes in that normativity, but through the surrogate supposed to believe. So I won't rehash that whole thing, but basically I was pointing out it's the same gesture to say, maybe we're really the insane people. Who's to say that all the so-called sane, normal people in the West aren't really truly the psychotics? No, we're not psychotics, trust me, because you know, we define psychosis in a certain way using reason, and we can trust reason. I mean ultimately, I pretty much endorse Enlightenment philosophy. I do believe we can trust reason, and I think all those critiques of reason, saying that you can't trust it because it's all just your narcissistic illusions and so on. No, reason is what cuts through the narcissistic illusions, because even if I can't know something directly, I can reason about it, and I can take into account the fact that I can't know. It's almost like there was a great point from, I think it was Badu, where he's talking about psychoanalysis, and he says, psychoanalysis talks about knowledge, but the knowledge is always what we don't know. So psychoanalysis can't really say anything other than it can give you knowledge about the things you don't have knowledge of. Not that it can't tell you about those things. It can just tell you that you will never know those things. For example, it could tell you that you will not have an accurate opinion of your own good intentions. Psychoanalysis can tell you that you will not have an accurate opinion of your own sincerity, that you will lie to yourself and deceive yourself about your own sincerity. Psychoanalysis can tell you it's almost like if somebody lies all the time, then you can get the truth out of them by knowing that they're lying. So it's that same weird trick where psychoanalysis can't tell you what you need to know, but it can tell you about the things that you don't know, or it can tell you, I mean, it's kind of a bad way to put it, but I guess, so my whole point here is the critique of madness is part of that same critique of normativity, or the critique of sanity as normativity is part of the same normativity it decries. And beyond that, you know, there's this certain acceptance that comes with accepting the fact that we may not know the answers to certain things. That's a big part of the consciousness transformation. It's almost like the person who wants the consciousness transformation has this goal in mind, but the real transformation is not really wanting the goal. So again, it sounds almost like a Hallmark card. Like, it's not really the destination, it's the journey, or, you know, all that stuff. But there is some truth to it, and again, it's making these things fresh. It's living them in a new way. It's understanding them in a new way. So I think that, so basically to recap, consciousness transformation has a number of problems. I mean, the problem of normativity, the problem of madness and the link to madness, also the problem of narcissistic recognition, and then once you have a little cosmic experience or epiphany or spiritual experience, there's all this ego inflation. That's a big problem with it. But I think we can redeem the idea of consciousness transformation as long as we understand it as this deflation, as subjective destitution, as coming to know our unconscious desires, giving up our belief in sincerity and good intentions, you know, really giving up our wealth of subjectivity, even giving up our belief in being misunderstood, or that we're so different or special or unique or different, you know, I said that, but, you know, it's the belief that we're misunderstood. That's part of the, you know, that's part of the whole narcissistic trap. So basically, consciousness transformation, I think, is a very good term if we understand it in this sort of, if we understand it as something to be feared, as a necessary evil or a necessary suffering, as opposed to something that we should strive for. You know, it's just like, you know, if we think of consciousness transformation as, oh, I'm going to be more efficient and better and more productive and healthier and happier and more full of love and more full of forgiveness and more merciful. No, it's the opposite. If anything, you'll get in touch with your lack of empathy. You'll stop, you know, constantly trying to prove yourself, or, you know, to make all these displays for the gaze of the other, to constantly prove your good intentions, and, you know, try to seek validation and seek approval from people and stuff like that. So, if anything, it's becoming more disagreeable, but it's almost a weird paradox. People who are too agreeable, they'll get in touch with their disagreeableness. People who are really disagreeable and resistant will probably learn to be agreeable. So, in a way, there is no normative. There's nothing normative you can say about individuation, because it's so unique, and it's, it's even like that weird paradox or that weird irony that Von Franz talked about, where she said that for most of us, we have a persona of being really good people, and so our shadows are these bad people, But for criminals, they're living out their bad actions, and sometimes their shadows are actually quite good. It's not common, but they might have a saintly shadow. So it's, depending on if you're a saint or a sinner, you almost will have repressed the opposite, the compensation. There'll be this strong compensatory. Basically, consciousness transformation is learning how to not compensate so much. It's almost like people might want consciousness transformation as a compensation for something. Maybe they feel emptiness or meaningless, so they want to compensate for that by having this big transformation. But part of it is learning. I guess here's a way of putting it. The people who want consciousness transformation are really frustrated. They want to get rid of their frustration. But the consciousness transformation is not how to not be frustrated anymore. It's how to bear frustration. It's how to put up with it. It's how to be able to stand the frustration. And so it doesn't give you what you want, but it teaches you how to deal with not getting what you want. That's the real transformation. And that's why it's so deflationary. If I had to summarize the whole thing, it's people say they want something, but they're never going to get that. They're never going to get that thing. And so the best they can do is to cope with it and learn to deal with not getting what they want. And so the real consciousness transformation is to grow up and realize you don't get what you want and actually come to terms with that and grieve the loss of all the beliefs, that you would get what you want and so on. And that's the real, if it sounds depressing, it's only depressing in the sense that James Hillman uses the term, where he says depression is not a dysfunction, it's functional. It sits you down and makes you damn miserable. So if we think of depression kind of as deflation, then yeah, sure, it's a little deflating. It's, it takes the wind out of your sails. Because as long as you really are so excited about consciousness transformation, it's not the real thing. That being said, you can't be too serious either, because if you're really serious, as Ferenczi put it, remaining serious is successful repression. So if you're really serious all the time, then you're like, I'm taking this so seriously. That's really narcissistic too, because you're so serious about yourself that it's still thinking that you matter in some way, or that you're necessary in some way. So I think once you've completely lost the idea that you're important, or that you're historical, or that you'll be remembered, or that you matter or are necessary, that's the subjective destitution, where you start to lose the ability to complain and lose the ability to, but it has to happen authentically. I know authenticity has become kind of passé in philosophical circles, but I do think there's something such as authenticity, and that authenticity comes through suffering and so on. And so it's authentically paying, not just buying. You can't buy this consciousness transformation. You can only pay for it, and the only way to pay for it is through suffering. And that suffering happens when you lose your wealth of subjectivity. It's becoming post-human in a way. It's going beyond the wealth of anthropocentric, egocentric, belief in your own good intentions, and belief in the wealth of the human spirit and the good nature of mankind and all that. So, all right. Happy 2012 consciousness transformation, everybody. Take care.